So, as a continuum to what really kind of started with David's lesson on Adar, and then I continued it. We didn't record that lesson, and then Ruthie, I think, was inspired by those two lessons in her lesson, and I was certainly inspired by Ruthie's lesson as well. So, I just wanted to sort of relate those to last week's parsha. And last week's parsha was Vayechel, which is Exodus 35. And it's interesting because leading up to last week's parsha, is the whole Sinai experience and the tablets and the commandments and all that. And it sort of lives in this world that we talk a lot about of the inner court. So in last week's portion, the tabernacle is starts to become a reality. But even before that portia, it's discussed. The details of the Mishkan are discussed before that parsha, and how it might be built and in what way it might be built. And of course, the commandments prior to that were discussed. But yet, here we go, we're moving along, and here we are in Exodus 35, and Moses comes to the people and says, "This is what God says." And the first thing he says is, "You shall keep the Sabbath," right? And then he says, "And we're going to gather all these things from your donations to build the Mishkan." And it's interesting because certainly the Sabbath has already come up from the Sinai experience. It's already been discussed. So why now again, so soon to say it again, right? Well, one reason obviously is because of its importance. But another reason is it's being tied to the creation of the Mishkan. So the Mishkan takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It's a creation like that, right? But before that becomes something of a reality and how that's going to be done, God reminds us that we need to keep the Sabbath, right? So I'm going to read that portion and then I'll make some comments on it. This is Kaplan's translation. So now Moses assembled the entire Israelite community and said to them, "These are the words that God has commanded for you to do. You may do work during 6 weekdays, but Saturday must be kept holy as a Sabbath of Sabbaths to God. Whoever does any work on that day shall be put to death. Do not ignite any fire on the Sabbath, no matter where you may live." Then Moses said to the entire community, "This is the word that God has commanded. Collect among yourselves an elevated offering to God. If a person feels like giving an offering to God, he can bring any of the following: gold, silver, copper, sky blue wool, dark red wool, wool dyed with the crimson worm, fine linen goats, wool reddened ram skins, blue processed hides, acacia wood, oil for the lamp, fragrances for the anointing oil, perfume incense, as well as sardonyx and other precious stones for the ephod and the breastplate. Every naturally talented individual among you shall come forth and make all that God has ordered. The tabernacle, along with its cover, tent, roof, fasteners, beams, crossbars, and pillars, the ark and its carrying poles, the ark cover, the clothing partition, the table along with its carrying poles, all its utensils, and the showbread, the menorah lamp, along with its utensils, lights, illuminating oil, the incense altar and its carrying poles, the anointing oil, perfumed incense, the drape for tabernacle's entrance, the sacrificial altar along with its carrying poles, all its utensils, the wash hands and its base. So it goes on and on. It's quite a project. This whole thing is really a miracle when you think about it. The first miracle to me is that the commandment isn't really a commandment. It's like if your heart tells you to make these donations, do it. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to in that way. And it provides an opportunity for amazing growth for the community because community, God comes to the community and says, if it's in your heart, donate your gold, your silver, your copper, your linen, your wool, all of these colors, precious stones. And here we are in the desert, in wandering around in the desert, and we're going to be making this beautiful, beautiful thing that ultimately the divine feminine, the Shekinah, will dwell in with us. So what happens is the big miracle is that everyone responds. The heart responds. It's not like these days where it's sort of like if you want to be a part of the temple, you kind of have to be a member and you that costs X amount of dollars every year for each person in your family. And I get it. It's necessary to sustain synagogues, to sustain the temple. And most temples are not rigid about it. And they work with you about it. But this is an entirely different experience. Even if you did not give anything, you still get to go in the Mishkan. You still get the benefits of the Mishkan, right? So this is all a heart response. This is people giving. So it's quite a miracle, I think. And it's so much so that Moses had to tell people to stop. So it wasn't that they were constantly going back. Hey, we'll do a matching fund, and we'll get more gold and we'll get more silver out of people. They just did this all from their heart, and it was one of those kind of rare successes that shows our community in the Torah, and it really brings forth such a beautiful blessing in the Mishkan. But let's get back to the Sabbath. So why is it that the Sabbath is mentioned? Well, the obvious things the rabbis say is, not only is that it's such an important thing, but also because the restrictions that are put on the Sabbath by the rabbis after a significant amount of haggling has to do with the building of the Mishkan. So there's 39 restrictions for us on the Sabbath. And believe me, I'm not teaching this to go over those restrictions or get real, orthodox about or halakhic about it. But the understanding always comes to this. No matter how orthodox the rabbi is, no matter how strict they are, it always comes to this idea of the creative process in building the Mishkan. The work of creation ceases on the Sabbath. It's not really about effort. It's not about lighting a candle or lighting a fire itself. It's about the creative process stopping. So Rashi actually says that the lighting of the fire, if it's not done for some creative reason, like, for example, he uses that you're not going to use the ashes for some other thing, like to put it in your garden for fertilizer, right? If you're not using a byproduct of this for something, like when you're building the Mishkan, you're building the Mishkan for a creative purpose. So Moses needs to tell the people, hey, even while we're building this beautiful thing, that Baruch Hashem, you've given all of your gold and silver and all of, not just giving of things, but working to make those things. And it says in there that the men worked with the women and the women worked with the men to get this done. So it was a real communal process that got the thing done. But what is this? It's really relative to our meditation. So many of you have been on roundings, and probably most of you, some kind of rounding. And we do extended Shabbats where we have a Shabbaton rounding, and you come and So it's deeper than just something that is, um, don't turn on the lights. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to surrender our devices, we're going to meditate extra times, and we're just going to be. So this gets back to that book that I always recommend over and over again by Eric Fromm, To Have or To Be, right? So there's this thing we have and we be. And on Shabbat, this is the distinction. It's an island of time where we are just in the state of being rather than creating or having. It's that part of the cycle of the week. So you might have heard me when I was reading the Parsha say, you shall be put to death if you do work on the Sabbath. Now, even in the most strict Orthodox sense, that was rarely, extremely rarely, ever become an edict where it was done. Because there has to be so many reasons and so many things done before a person can be put to death for disobeying the Sabbath. So that's rarely ever done. But for me, it's not about putting someone to death. For me, it's that balance of those two opposites of rest and activity, of that which is holy and that which is not, of the balance of creating and then just being, or having and being. Now, if you don't have that balance and you're just constantly running and creating, that leads to death. The proverb says there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death, right? So going back to this lighting of the fire, Psalm, I think it's 27:20. I wrote it down here somewhere. No, 20:27 says, the soul of a man is the flame of God. So this is really about our neshima, our soul, and its growth and its repair and its return, right? So we always, at least I do, and most of the teachers at UMI do, we think of the Mishkan as our body and the Holy of Holies as the divine within us. And our inner court of emotions and intellect is the inner court, and the outer court of our actions, like that, right? So this Mishkan has a sort of metaphoric meaning to us because it's who we are. We are a Mishkan in our sense. And the light that is kindled in the inner court of the Mishkan is that same light that Abba Lafia talks about, the candle of God, Ner Elohim. And this candle of God is within us. So if we're going about lighting candles of creation for various different things in our activities and never just stop lighting and experience the light, the divine light within us, sooner or later, that candle just burns out. And, we become burnt out. And that proverb comes to life because we're constantly running and running and running. And we eventually get back to a place where there's no home anymore. So this idea of to have or to be or to create. So we have in this Parsha, the first utterance from Moses is keep the Shabbat, keep that holy rest, keep that divine candle, experience that within yourself by not necessarily counting the restrictions of 39 things that we can and we can't do. That's fine too. I'm not throwing any shade on that if that's what your thing is. But what I'm saying is transcendent to that is the experience of being rather than creating. And then after Havdalah, we go out into the world of action. And this is what the sages are saying about why all of a sudden, again, on the next page, after already telling the people this is what God has commanded, keep the Sabbath day, make it holy, blah, 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 all the 10 commandments, 613 commandments. Now God assembles everybody and says, God said, keep the Sabbath. Well, you just said that. Well, no, these two things together are important because creation of the Mishkan, it's like the Aleph, pure unified field consciousness, moving and emanating into the world of creation. So the discussion in the prior Parsha is about creation. It's like an architectural Parsha. This is a construction Parsha now, where the Mishkan is about to be constructed. So action, which is that lamed on energy that is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Tishri energy, moving, right? That action turns into motion. Motion is that nun energy. And that moves all the way through this cycle. And this is what we've been talking about, the cycles of life. And the cycles of life are an opportunity for the repair of neshima within us. Whatever happens within those cycles, that's an opportunity for that particular repair, right? So we talk a little bit about the dialectic, and this is part of the Shabbat experience. It's part of the meditation experience, which is there is your soul as it is right now. And when we dive in our meditation, or we dive in any way, just touching consciousness or devotion, we experience that neshima, and its awareness grows. What does it grow? An awareness of the divine essence within ourselves. And as that divine essence grows and we go into activity, it comes along with us. So if there's any gematria to me that over the years, and I've gotten into it and out of it in many different times, sometimes I read a book on gematria and it seems like you can make anything work if you want it, right? But the thing that really stands out to me is the gematria of ahava being 13, and the gematria of Ichad, unity or one, being 13, and together equaling 26, which is the numerical value of the holy name, the tetragrammatron, right? Yud He Vav He. So going back to one of the things that struck me, and if you hadn't heard Ruth's lesson, I suggest it should be on the YouTube. You could listen to David and Ruth's lesson over again. I think they were great. But one of the things that struck me was she was talking from this sort of divine feminine way of understanding the process from experience, right? Because it was obvious to me that she was talking from her own experience. I wasn't on the call. I listened to it recorded afterwards. But, and she said at a point, in this idea of letting go of illusions, which that, as David pointed out, kuf is that energy in that letter of Adar, and it has to do with disillusionment or letting go of illusion. And she pointed out that sometimes that can be really a traumatic thing, right? Because we're so convinced about something, our illusions are very convincing. So disillusionment can be a traumatic thing. And she said, if you just open to like 10% of letting go of your attachments to narratives and potentially illusions, or what you're so sure of. If she said, if you think you're 100% sure of something, draw that back to like 90%, right? And that's a beginning. So one of the things I wanted to sort of continue that with is understanding that the process is what really shapes and repairs the soul. The goal is beautiful, right? But it's the process that really shapes us. And in order to have that process, we have to surrender like we do in meditation. We're not creating in that meditation. We're letting go of any kind of narrative. And we're waiting to receive, like it's so beautifully portrayed in Shir HaShirim. Take off her clothes and she's waiting for her beloved, right? So this is a waiting process, but it's also emptying of the cup process. So it is, no matter how we look at it, a process. And that's why there's 32 paths. Like if you read Krishnamurti, which I love, but his attitude is there's no process, just stop, right? Just stop and experience this pure unified field. And some people can actually do that. But most of us, there are paths. And it's a process, and step by step, and step by step, and step by step. So that process also includes acceptance. So there's a weird paradox in our tradition, which is you don't really have these ecstatic, mystical experiences without joy. So if you're not in a state of simcha, if you don't have simcha, you're not going to have these experiences. But at the same time, we're all suffering. And we all love to talk about our suffering. And we love to add to our suffering, right? It's just the way we are. So that's part of who we are, right? So there's this sort of law of paradoxes and opposites that two things are happening at the same time. Yes, we can be suffering, but at the same time, we could be experiencing that joy because that is recognized as part of the process. So it's a growth experience. I remember being in a lecture with Maharishi when someone came to the microphone and said, Maharishi, I've got a problem. And Maharishi said, oh, you have an opportunity. And that's the joy of the problems that we have. And it's so easy to say that sitting here. And I don't always get joy in my sufferings, believe me. But when I do, that's when they become the most valuable to me. So if I go back to Sefer Yetzirah, the first chapter, fifth verse, it talks about the dimensions and good and evil. It describes, or good and bad, it describes as a dimension. So there's a movement. You're moving towards good or you're moving towards evil. And the only difference between the two is moving towards good is that which allows you to experience the unity of the divine within yourself and all around you. Moving towards evil is separating you. It's covering it, making more klipot. So going back to Rambam for a moment and Guide to the Perplexed, he starts off smashing idols, right? And he starts off smashing our ideas of the anthropomorphic God, God as an image. And he does it very scholarly because he talks about what the word for image that is used in Genesis and the word for image that's used here and there and what the real word is. And that's something for David to teach us about. But I just love it because he smashes it. But then later on in Guide for Perplexed, he says, I understand its necessity. Because when you're on the path, in order to grow, sometimes you need to believe in something that's not true. that gets you to the next. As long as you're moving forward and not towards, you're moving towards experiencing the essence within yourself and all around you as one. There's a time when that anthropomorphic idea of God is necessary, and it's clearly in the scriptures, right? But he also says there's a time when it has to go. So that's the thing. It's like in the Veda, there's these states of consciousness. You experience some samadhi in your meditation. You experience that briefly, like a gap where you transcend thought and there's no letter anymore. It's just infinite silence, pure consciousness. That's represented by the Aleph. So if we look at Ahava, or Ehyeh is a great way of looking at it because Ehyeh is Aleph Hey Yud Hey, right? So it's that Aleph opening into the container. So the Hey is sort of that opening. If you think of the Sephirot, it's like Keter. It's like a portal. So that pure consciousness that's represented by the Aleph, as it expresses itself into something. Just like the well goes into some kind of pipe so that your water, that you can actually receive the water, right? And then you receive it in your own glass, which is the lower hay. So there's two hays there. The yud itself is the other side of the aleph, which is the catalyst of that energy moving into creation. So that's Ehyeh, that movement. So that's what Moses says to God at the burning bush, who shall I tell him sent me? And he says, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh, which is, I am being and I am becoming. So it's two things going on at the same time. It's the Sabbath and the building of the Mishkan. It's experienced that pure silent Aleph consciousness. We don't have to say it. It really doesn't have a sound until we attach comets to it, and it has the ah sound, which is how ahava sounds, right? And that's the love. So the oneness and the love is 13 and 13, which equals 26. And that's the expression, that divine expression that was expressed in the Mishkan. But we have to experience that. So Moses first says, keep the Sabbath or you'll just die. Now, I don't mean that literally, like you have to stay home from Friday night to Saturday. I think that's a great tradition and I love doing it. But what I'm saying is that experience of of being within yourself is what is the bottom line here. It's the deepest meaning. And that experience comes from letting go in a complete state of rest. And then we move out with that into action, right? So those two things are going on all the time. That cycle is necessary. So when we have a rounding, which I hope you all will come to, we have that experience in spades. So it's like we just go from, let's say, Friday night to Monday or whatever, and we're experiencing that stop. We'll have plenty of time to build a Mishkan on Monday. Right now, we're going to experience that flame, that lamp of God within ourselves, the Psalms 20, 27. But going back to that final point, it is a process. And when we have acceptance of that process, it helps us to have joy. So we can't just like talk about this today and think we will be getting rid of all of our illusions this afternoon or tonight. So like Ruthie said, let's talk about, it's funny in this day and age, there's so much polarity going on that it's really, really obvious. So I'll see on social media, political stuff and stuff, war, pro-war, anti-war stuff. And and there's so many beautiful memes that go with them. It's like pro-war stuff has, oh, let go of your illusions and let go what you think because it's not what you think, blah, blah, blah. Stuff I've been trying to teach for 30 years. And then same thing on anti-war. It's the same stuff. So, but what's ubiquitous in all of it is it's used as a weapon. It's not self-referral, right? It's not looking at yourself with these statements. So it is no teaching whatsoever that's worth a hill of beans that doesn't create a self-reflective thing. Maybe it's just a moment. Maybe it's just a few moments of self-reflection. But when Ruth said that, I thought that was great because, if you can say to yourself, I'm going to take 10% of what I think is so right. I'm so convinced this war is God's war. Oh, I'm so convinced this is Satan's war. If you can take 10% of that knowing into uncertainty, that's self-reflection, right? And it certainly isn't easy. The way to do it is prescribed in the Torah. And we have to have, before we build our Mishkan, that self-reflective complete rest where we empty the cup and the cup is filled.